I gave this story a very cheesy title of A Quest for Love, because why not? Archimedes walked up to the outer wall of Penduran, the capital of the human kingdom of Kithian. The main gate into the town was open, and he joined the mercantile bustle, heading to the market in the centre of town. The road was still muddy from the late spring rains the week before. "Hey, mister!" Archimedes looked down at the boy who was tugging on his cloak, surreptitiously making sure that his money pouch was untouched. "You look like you could handle yourself in a fight. I bet you can't beat our champ." The boy ran off into the crowd. There was a great deal of noise coming from the direction of town square, so Archimedes headed towards it. The sound of sword clanging against sword could be heard, along with cheers and yells from the crowd. Archimedes pushed through to the front of the crowd to watch the contest. The boy appeared beside him. "You found it then?" he said. "I'm Tao." "Archimedes," Archimedes answered. "Who are they?" "The big guy comes in with caravans." A Goliath-like man was stomping in the arena, his frustration and anger clearly visible. He was unarmored and carrying a great axe. "And that's my big sister, Issy." The other combatant opposite was a young woman in leather armor. She was clearly enjoying herself. She chuckled as she deftly dodged her opponent's charge and parried his axe. It was a sweet, joyous sound, and Archimedes heard himself chuckle in unison. "The big guy is not very good," the boy said, shaking his head. "He just shouts raw and charges. Izzy will beat him easily," he said with pride. Moments later, there was a thump as the man hit the ground, unconscious. A huge cheer went up from the crowd. "And our champion remains undefeated, Isabella, cleric of Apollo." Labourers carried away the knocked-out loser as the crowd cheered again. "So now, who feels that they are up to the challenge?" Tao jabbed the back of Archimedes' leg. "Your turn," he said. Archimedes stepped forward. "We have a new challenger," the announcer said. The crowd cheered. "What is your name, sir?" "I am Archimedes Reginald Fitzgerald III, Prince of the lands of Yondelusier." He turned to Isabella and bowed slightly, ensuring his eyes were always on his opponent. "My lady." Isabella smiled and performed a brief curtsy despite wearing pantaloons. Archimedes returned the smile, drew his sword, and stood ready. Archimedes was fatigued. He could see that Isabella was too. This was now a fight of endurance. The first to make an error would lose. With a burst of speed, Isabella swung. Archimedes parried barely. Thump. Archimedes staggered back. Isabella grinned as her long braid swung over her shoulder. Archimedes could tell that it had struck him as he parried her blow. She lunged again. Archimedes, still stunned, misjudged and blacked out as the blade sunk into him. "You're a really good swordsman." Archimedes opened his eyes. He was on a bed, in a tent it looked like. "Huh?" "You're a really good swordsman," Isabella said again. She touched his forehead. Archimedes' senses cleared as the healing magic flowed into him. She helped him sit up and handed him a glass flask. "Here, drink this. It's a healing potion." Archimedes let her help him, and he felt his body restore more fully. "You know, if you're going to lie when you go to places, you really need to learn how to act," Isabella said. She moved back to the chair by the side of the bed. She let her hand slide down his cheek as she moved and rested it on the bed. Archimedes looked at her, puzzled. "What's your real name?" she asked. He smiled. Archimedes Frostbane of Lothlorien. She offered her hand. He took it and gave the back of her hand a light kiss before letting go. It is lovely to make your acquaintance. I am Isabella, cleric of Apollo, she said formally, before breaking into a warm smile. But you may call me Isabella. She then indicated around her. And this is our arena recovery tent. The breeze whistled through the leaves around the grove. The copper of autumn could be seen here and there as the summer drew to a close. Isabella lay with her head on Archimedes' chest. He absent-mindedly stroked her hair. I wish you didn't have to go, Isabella said. It won't be for long. I'll be back again soon. A twig snapped. Isabella tensed, lifted her head and looked around. Archimedes followed her gaze. There's nothing there, he said. Probably just the wildlife. Isabella looked a moment longer and lay down. Maybe Dal's spying on us again. Isabella swatted his arm. Don't tease, she said. A flock of birds leapt out of the trees. A dozen royal guards entered the grove. Isabella jumped up. No, she half shouted, half screamed. No, 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 no. Archimedes was on his feet. Hands held, palms out, staying close. One of the guards stepped forward. His armor was more ornate than the rest. Seize him, he commanded. Two men moved in and grabbed Archimedes from either side. Let him go, Isabella shouted. She moved her hands in the air, casting a spell. Energy fizzed in her hands, and then nothing. Gerard, she screamed. Get out here, you coward. An elderly man in robes stepped out from behind a tree. His hands held in front of him, ready to counter anything that Isabella should cast. Isabella stood glaring at him, her arms by her sides, with hands balled into fists. Why must you drain every moment of happiness from me? She demanded. Her face red as tears glistened on her cheeks. I have orders from the king, your highness, he said softly, the creases on his wrinkled face deepening as he spoke. As do you. Isabella slowly relaxed and turned to look at Archimedes. Your highness? He queried. Isabella looked at the ground. I am Isabella, Philippa, Agnes, Catherine, Aurelia, Keithian. Cleric of Apollo, and Princess of Keithian, she said. I'm sorry, Archie. It's okay, Izzy. Archimedes said quietly. Garrett nodded, and the guards marched him towards the woodland track. There was a jail cart waiting, and he was secured inside. The guards and the old man mounted horses and all set off towards the castle. They heard Isabella scream as they retreated. Dal! Dal, you dirty snitch! I hope you break your neck. Moments later, Archimedes heard the sounds of a galloping horse, so Isabella rode past them, not slowing as she passed. 5 paces by 3. The cell was 5 paces by 3. Archimedes measured it out several times in the last few hours. There had been no ceremony when he arrived at the keep. The guards had taken him straight to the tower. Gerard and another mage had escorted them too, ensuring that Archimedes couldn't attempt any magic, ready to counter it if he did. The door was a thick oak affair with heavy iron strips. There was a small hatch in the bottom that could be opened to pass food through, but not large enough to fit much more than that. The walls were made from the same stone blocks that formed the rest of the castle, though the masonry here was rougher. On the opposite side to the door was the latrine and a barred window that looked out over the town. Thankfully, the cell was clean. Archimedes had spent the first hour looking for a means of escape. both arcane and mundane. The cell was a well-constructed anti-magic zone. Archimedes had stretched his arm as far as he could through the bars, and even down the latrine, to see if he could reach past the extent of the zone, but to no avail. The non-magical means were equally fruitless, and so he paced. Archimedes woke. He was slowly getting used to it, but his back still dimly ached from sleeping on the stone floor. The routine hadn't changed much over the last few days. 3 times a day, food would be passed through the hatch. No words, no other communication. He had been surprised by the food. It was the type and quantity that he would expect as a guest, not a prisoner. His gut told him to conserve the food in case this was a test. He ate the minimum he needed and stored the rest. He had listened to the sounds of the town as time passed. The carts, the merchants shouting, and then the quiet peacefulness of the night, the guards tolling the watch bells every hour. This time it was different. It was dark, bar the light from the Silver Lady as she waltzed across the sky. It was quiet, too quiet. The night birds should be calling, and the bells. There had been no bells. Archimedes stood. He looked through the bars at the town. The watchtower fires had gone out. The town should have been bathed in the moonlight. Instead, it was shrouded in darkness, as if the shadows themselves had grown like creeping tendrils. "Alarm! Alarm!" Archimedes shouted, knowing somehow instinctively that the sound would carry no further than the walls of the cell. The main gate exploded first. A huge fireball sent orc-sized chunks flying into the surrounding buildings. The east and west gates were next to go. The buildings closest to the outer walls ignited, and fire leapt from roof to roof of its own accord. Archimedes banged on the door of the cell with his fist. No answer. Again, no answer. He ran back to the window. Half the town was now ablaze. Townsfolk were running around, tripping over each other. Where were the guards? Archimedes turned, let himself slide down the wall, resigned. He knew already. The temple bells tolled. Click, click. A key moved in the lock in the cell door. Archimedes stood, back to the window, ready. It couldn't be one of the guards. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like someone trying to be quiet. The mechanism moved. Archimedes waited. Slowly the door moved towards him, accompanied by a high-pitched grunting. As soon as it was open wide enough, a head appeared at the height of Archimedes' stomach. "Archimedes?" the girl asked. She was about 7 or 8, and looked just like a younger version of Isabella. "Yes," Archimedes said. He took a couple of paces forward and pulled the door open to look in the corridor. "You alone?" "Yes," the girl nodded. "Bad things here. Izzy told me to get you." She pressed the handle of a dirk into Archimedes' hand. "Sword," she said. "Do you know where we're going?" She nodded. "Okay, take me to Izzy." The girl turned on her heel and fled out the cell, down the steps at the end of the corridor. Archimedes followed. On the stairs, he switched the dirk into his left hand and opened his right. It sparked with magic fire and stretched out, solidifying into his sword. The girl's eyes widened. Archimedes smiled and handed the dirk back to her. "I think you're going to need this more than me." She nodded, eyes still wide. "What's your name?" Archimedes asked. "Violet," she whispered back. Archimedes nodded. "Right, lead on." Violet led Archimedes through several passages and stairways of the castle, clearly familiar with its layout and the routes that only curious young children find out. They paused for a moment here and there as the sounds of fighting ahead died away. Finally, she led him up a ladder to some rafters. She tiptoed swiftly along a beam and pointed down. Archimedes looked. They were above the children's dormitory. Isabella was fighting off 2 soldiers at one end, and 2 girls were violently waving broom handles at soldiers at the other. Lying on the cots in between were 4 figures, 3 boys, 1 girl. All but the girl were motionless. The girl was pale, holding her stomach. A hooded figure stood in a corner, dressed in shredded black rags, holding a staff and muttering. Violet crouched, poised, blade pointing down at one of the soldiers attacking Isabella. Archimedes dived at the hooded figure. Sparks crackled and fizzed out at the end of his staff as Archimedes disrupted the spell casting. He was pushed away and heard a garbled thump. Violet had taken out her target. Archimedes uttered a quick incantation, and his blade ignited as he stabbed the figure. The figure screamed as the rags burned and then slumped forwards. A second yell came from one of the soldiers as the flames magically jumped to them. "Where's Dal?" Isabella asked as her healing spell finished. She helped the girl out of the cot and to her feet. "Where's Dal?" she asked again, looking directly at Violet. "You were supposed to stay together." Violet looked at her feet. "He was taken," she said quietly. I just ran." One of the girls with the broom handle walked up behind her and gently placed her hands on Violet's shoulders. They looked like they could be castle maids. "Don't be angry, Miss Isabella. We need to go," Archimedes said. "There will be more." Isabella looked at him. "The throne room," she said. She took a glance at her brothers, the boys on the cots, and headed for the door. The others followed, and Archimedes took up the rear. Isabella reached the throne room antechamber. The heavy oak throne room doors were hanging awkwardly from their hinges, having been blasted from the outside. King Alfred was standing on the central dais, flanked by 2 of his royal guard, slashing at the horde of skeletons marching against them. Gerard stood behind, tending to the fallen queen. Isabella indicated the group should stay close as she rushed forward, casting a spell. As she passed the threshold, a wave of energy burst from her hand, disintegrating all the undead. Isabella and her 2 sisters held their mother tightly as Izzy told of her son's death. "And what of Dal?" the king said, looking through the window over the town. "He was taken," Isabella said. "I don't know where." "That explains their retreat," the king said, half to himself. "If they couldn't have my firstborn, they'd take one of the others." "They've left?" Isabella asked. The king nodded. "What about the town?" "Burned, mostly." "If you have magical means to send a message," Archimedes stepped forward, nodding towards Gerard, "I can contact the elves of Lothlorien." "We are already here." Archimedes turned at the familiar voice as Atharal of the Lothlorien High Council walked through the doorway. "At least those that I've been permitted to bring." "So you are from Lothlorien?" King Alfred sat in his throne, glaring down at Archimedes. The sun streaming in through the side windows fell upon the newly replaced oak doors, but the room was otherwise empty. "The elven forest permits no humans to enter. How came you to be there?" "I was raised there. As far as I know, my parents lived there for some time. However, I've never known them." The king sat in silence for a while. "The kingdom of Merowith is ruled by a sorcerer and his army of warlocks. Many years ago, I was given a choice. I could retain my kingdom, and my people live in peace, but I had to give up my firstborn," he said at last. "When Eleanor was expecting the birth of Isabella, we sent an envoy to Lothlorien and begged the High Council to protect her. They duly came and cast many spells over her and the town. Merowith seemed to turn a blind eye while Isabella was growing up, so long as she made no attempt to find a suitor. But as time went on, I was forced to weigh the happiness of my daughter against the survival of my people. The king sighed. But the pact is broken. They have slaughtered my people, slain 3 of my sons, and taken the youngest. He looked at Archimedes. Your arrival brought this upon me. I know not what plan they have for Tao, but you must bring him back, alive. Do this, and I shall permit you to share my daughter's happiness. The king stood. But until then, you are hereby exiled from my kingdom. Guards! The throne room doors opened and 4 guards entered. Furnish this man with supplies for 1 week, and then remove him from this land. Should he return to the walls of this town without my son, he is to be killed where he stands. Archimedes bowed and wordlessly allowed himself to be escorted from the room. The guards took Archimedes to the side door at the western gate. Thanks to the elven magic, the gate was nearly fully repaired. On the other side of the wall, the guards stopped. 3 of them stood facing outwards, forming a perimeter. Archimedes looked at the 4th. His eyebrows knotted in confusion. Isabella lowered her hood, ran to Archimedes, and held him in a long embrace. One of the guards coughed, and Isabella let go, taking a step back. She held out a longsword in its scabbard. This was given to me by your elves in my christening, she said. The blue gem in the pommel of the sword gleamed in the moonlight. She speaks to me in my dreams. Her name is Nineveh. Handing the sword over, she said, I think she may prefer you to me. Archimedes took hold of the hilt and was suddenly filled with a sense of warm familiarity, a sense of home. Isabella smiled. She likes you. Archimedes put his free arm around her waist. He pulled her in and gently kissed her. I will find Tao and bring him back. Isabella smiled and kissed him again. Take care, my love. She stepped back and raised her hood. The guards drew in and headed back through the door. Archimedes stared at the grain in the wood for a while. He turned towards the horizon, breathed, and walked on.